Most empires disappear slowly. Their borders shrink, their institutions decay, their authority fades until eventually the world simply moves on without them. The Persian Empire did not disappear that way. For nearly 2 centuries, it ruled the largest political territory the ancient world had ever seen, stretching from the mountains of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean, from the steppes of Anatolia to the fertile valley of the Nile. Dozens of cultures lived within its borders. Languages, religions, and traditions that had once existed under rival kingdoms were suddenly governed by a single imperial structure. And yet, when the end came, it arrived with surprising speed. Within the span of a few years, a young Macedonian king crossed into Asia, defeated the Persian armies in a handful of battles, and dismantled the empire that had dominated the Near East for generations. The story is often told as the triumph of Alexander the Great, but the deeper question lies elsewhere. How did the Persian Empire rise so quickly? And why, despite its size and sophistication, did the system eventually prove vulnerable? Welcome to the history of the world, where we explain how power rises, how systems endure, and how empires fall. To understand Persia, we must begin before Persia itself mattered. For centuries, the lands of the ancient Near East had been dominated by empires that ruled through fear. The most formidable of these had been the Assyrian Empire. Assyrian armies marched across Mesopotamia and the Levant with ruthless efficiency. Cities that resisted were destroyed, populations were deported, entire regions were reorganized through violence designed to discourage rebellion. For a time, the system worked, but fear is a difficult foundation for long-term stability. Assyria's power relied on constant expansion and constant intimidation. Once the machinery of conquest slowed, the empire's enemies began to coordinate. In the late 7th century before the Common Era, Assyria collapsed under pressure from rival kingdoms that had once been its subjects. What followed was not immediate order. Power fractured across the region. The Neo-Babylonian Empire rose in Mesopotamia. The Median Kingdom dominated parts of the Iranian plateau. Smaller states and cities maneuvered between larger rivals, forming alliances that rarely lasted long. In this unstable environment, Persia was not yet a major power. The Persians were one of several Iranian peoples living on the plateau east of Mesopotamia. Their kingdom was relatively small and often overshadowed by their neighbors, particularly the Medes, whose rulers exercised influence over the region. At the time, few observers would have predicted that Persia would soon dominate the entire Near East. The transformation began with one man. His name was Cyrus. Cyrus II, later remembered as Cyrus the Great, inherited the Persian throne in the mid-6th century before the Common Era. At first, his position was modest. Persia remained formally subordinate to the Median Kingdom, whose ruler, Astyages, governed a loose coalition of territories across the Iranian plateau. But political systems built on loose alliances are rarely stable. Internal rivalries weakened Median authority. Discontent spread among elites who felt excluded from power. Within this environment, Cyrus found opportunity. He rebelled. The revolt against Astyages did not unfold as a simple war between Persians and Medes. Instead, it revealed the fragile loyalties within the Median system itself. Several Median commanders defected to Cyrus during the conflict, and the rebellion quickly gained momentum. By the time Astyages' forces collapsed, Cyrus had not merely overthrown a rival king. He had united the Persian and Median elites under a single political structure. This decision would prove decisive. Many conquerors destroy the ruling class they defeat. Cyrus did something different. Rather than eliminating Median authority, he incorporated it into the new imperial system. Median nobles retained positions within the administration and military. Their experience helped stabilize the newly expanded kingdom. At the time, this approach might have appeared pragmatic. In reality, it represented a new model of imperial governance. Previous empires in the region had often ruled through domination. Cyrus began constructing a system that relied instead on integration. His ambitions did not stop with the Iranian plateau. To the west lay Lydia, a wealthy kingdom in Anatolia ruled by the famous King Croesus. Lydia controlled valuable trade routes and possessed one of the most prosperous economies of the ancient world. Croesus believed Persia could be contained before it grew too powerful, and he launched a campaign against Cyrus. The result was not what he expected. Cyrus's armies defeated the Lydian forces and captured the capital city of Sardis. The conquest brought enormous wealth and strategic territory under Persian control. But once again, the most important development was not simply military victory. Cyrus allowed local institutions to remain largely intact. Lydian elites continued to administer their territories. Regional customs were preserved. Instead of replacing the entire governing structure, Persian authority layered itself above existing systems. What followed was not chaos, it was stability. From Anatolia, Cyrus turned his attention toward the greatest prize of the ancient Near East, Babylon. Babylon was not merely a powerful city, it was a symbol of civilization itself. For centuries it had dominated Mesopotamia through its wealth, religious prestige and monumental architecture. Its walls were legendary. Its temples commanded immense influence. Yet Babylon's political leadership had grown unpopular among segments of its population. Internal tensions had weakened the authority of its king, Nabonidus. When Cyrus advanced toward the city in 539 before the Common Era, he encountered less resistance than one might expect for such a formidable capital. Babylon fell quickly. But what happened next distinguished Cyrus from many conquerors before him. Rather than presenting himself as a destroyer, he framed his victory as liberation. Babylonian temples were restored. Religious practices were respected. Populations that had previously been displaced by Babylonian rulers were permitted to return to their homelands. One of the most well-known examples involved the Jewish population exiled decades earlier during Babylonian conquests. Under Persian rule, they were allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This policy was not simply generosity, it was strategy. Cyrus understood something fundamental about governing diverse territories. Attempting to erase local traditions often produced endless rebellion. Allowing those traditions to survive created loyalty instead. The empire that began to take shape under his rule was therefore unusual for its time. It did not attempt to impose a single culture across its territories. It governed through a combination of central authority and local autonomy. Regional traditions were preserved, religious practices were tolerated, local elites were incorporated into imperial administration rather than replaced. In effect, Cyrus built an empire by convincing conquered populations that life under Persian rule could remain familiar. The irony was subtle but powerful. The largest empire the ancient world had yet seen was constructed not through uniformity, but through accommodation. By the time Cyrus died, Persian authority stretched across an enormous territory. Yet the system he created was still fragile. Conquests had been rapid, and rapid expansion always carries risks. Newly acquired regions must be administered. Communication must be maintained across vast distances. Loyalty must be cultivated among peoples who had only recently become subjects. These challenges would fall to Cyrus's successors. For a brief period, the empire experienced instability. Political struggles emerged within the royal family. Rival claimants attempted to seize authority. Rebellions erupted in several regions that sensed weakness at the center. At the time, the empire might easily have fragmented. Instead, a new ruler emerged who would transform the Persian state from a powerful kingdom into a durable imperial system. His name was Darius. Darius did not inherit a perfectly stable throne. His rise to power required suppressing multiple revolts across the empire. Regions from Babylon to the Iranian plateau challenged his legitimacy. Pretenders claimed royal authority. Local leaders tested the limits of imperial control. Yet Darius responded with remarkable efficiency. Rebellions were defeated one by one. Military force restored order. But once stability returned, Darius began something even more important. He reorganized the empire itself. Cyrus had built a vast realm through conquest and diplomacy. Darius would build the system that allowed it to function. When Darius consolidated power in the late 6th century before the Common Era, the Persian Empire already stretched across enormous distances. From the highlands of Iran to the Mediterranean coast, from Anatolia to the edges of Central Asia, dozens of peoples now lived under a single political authority. Conquest had been rapid. Administration had not yet caught up. This was the central problem facing every large empire in history: distance. Armies could move quickly when victory was fresh. Governing territory year after year required something more complicated: systems capable of transmitting information, collecting revenue, and maintaining loyalty across regions that might take weeks or months to reach. Darius understood that conquest alone was not enough. Without structure, the empire would eventually fracture. His solution was administrative rather than theatrical. Instead of constantly expanding the empire's borders, he focused on organizing what Persia already controlled. The first major innovation was territorial. Darius divided the empire into large provinces known as satrapies. Each satrapy was governed by an official known as a satrap, usually drawn from Persian nobility or trusted regional elites. These governors were responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and overseeing local administration. At first glance, the system resembled arrangements used by earlier empires, but Darius added an important safeguard. Power within each province was deliberately divided. The satrap oversaw civil administration, but military forces often answered to separate commanders. Financial officials reported directly to the royal court. Inspectors, sometimes called the king's eyes and ears, traveled through the provinces to monitor local authorities and report corruption or rebellion. The structure prevented any single governor from accumulating too much independent power. The assumption was simple: authority should flow outward from the king, but loyalty should flow back toward the center. At the time, this seemed reasonable. In many cases, it worked. But administration requires more than hierarchy. It requires movement, the ability to communicate quickly across distance. To solve this problem, the Persians built one of the most remarkable logistical systems of the ancient world: the royal road. This network of roads connected major cities across the empire, stretching from the Persian heartland through Mesopotamia and into Anatolia. Along its route stood relay stations, where messengers could change horses and continue their journey without delay. Messages that once required weeks of travel could now cross enormous distances in a matter of days. The system allowed imperial orders to reach distant provinces rapidly, while information from the frontier could return to the court with unprecedented speed. Herodotus, the Greek historian who later described the system, famously observed that neither snow nor rain nor heat nor darkness prevented the royal couriers from completing their routes. It was, in effect, an early communications infrastructure for an empire spanning thousands of kilometers. Meanwhile, the system adjusted. Darius introduced standardized taxation across the satrapies. Rather than relying on irregular tribute from conquered territories, provinces were assigned fixed contributions based on their economic capacity. Some delivered silver, others grain, horses, or luxury goods. The policy made imperial revenue predictable. Trade benefited as well. Under Persian rule, merchants could move more safely across long distances than they had under earlier fragmented kingdoms. Roads were maintained, banditry was suppressed, and major trade corridors remained stable. To facilitate commerce, Darius introduced a standardized gold coin known as the daric. While many regions continued using local currencies, the imperial coin provided a trusted medium for large transactions across the empire. Taken together, these reforms did something subtle but powerful. They transformed the Persian Empire from a loose collection of conquered territories into a functioning political system. Information moved faster, resources flowed more predictably, authority could reach regions that once lay far beyond the practical reach of earlier empires. The Persian state had become in many ways a machine of administration, but every machine has limits. Distance could be managed, diversity could be accommodated. Yet the very size of the empire meant that coordination was always delicate. The loyalty of local elites remained essential. Provincial governors required autonomy to manage distant territories, yet too much autonomy risked weakening central authority. For the moment, however, the system worked. By the early 5th century before the Common Era, the Persian Empire stood as the most powerful political structure in the known world. Its territories spanned multiple climates, cultures, and economic zones. Its armies could mobilize vast numbers of troops from across these regions. To outsiders, The empire appeared almost unchallengeable. Yet beyond its western frontier, a very different political system was taking shape. Across the Aegean Sea lay the Greek world. Unlike Persia, the Greeks did not live under a unified empire. Their political landscape was fragmented into independent city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and dozens of smaller communities. Each governed itself through its own institutions, traditions, and rivalries. The Greek cities often fought one another. In fact, their internal conflicts were nearly constant. To an imperial power such as Persia, this fragmentation might have seemed familiar. After all, Cyrus had conquered the Near East by taking advantage of divisions among its kingdoms. Yet the Greek world operated according to a different logic. The cities of the Aegean coast, particularly those in Asia Minor, had long interacted with Persian territories. Some had fallen under Persian control during earlier expansions. These Greek communities, known collectively as the Ionian cities, existed in a complex relationship with the empire. They retained many of their local institutions, but remained subject to Persian authority. Over time, tensions grew. In 499, before the Common Era, several Ionian cities revolted against Persian rule. The rebellion was not initially large, but it attracted outside attention. The city of Athens, one of the emerging powers in mainland Greece, provided limited military support to the rebels. From the perspective of the Persian court, this intervention was troubling. Local uprisings could be tolerated. External interference suggested a broader challenge to imperial authority. The revolt was eventually suppressed, but the event revealed something important. Persian influence had reached the edges of the Greek world, and the Greeks had begun to test its limits. What followed was not chaos, it was escalation. Persian rulers sought to reassert control over the region and discourage future revolts. Greek cities, fiercely protective of their independence, prepared to resist imperial encroachment. The result would be a series of conflicts remembered today as the Greco-Persian Wars. From the Persian perspective, these campaigns were not an existential struggle. The empire possessed far greater resources than the scattered Greek city-states, but the geography and political culture of the Greek world created challenges unfamiliar to Persian administration. City-states could mobilize quickly. Their armies were smaller, but intensely motivated. Decisions were made locally rather than through imperial chains of command. The Persian system preferred hierarchy. The Greek system thrived on decentralization. When Persian forces first confronted the Greek armies at Marathon in 490 before the Common Era, the result surprised observers on both sides. A smaller Greek force defeated the Persian expeditionary army and forced its withdrawal. The defeat did not threaten the empire itself. Persia remained vast and powerful. Yet the encounter revealed something important about the limits of imperial projection. Large systems often move slowly. Local resistance can move quickly. A decade later, the Persian king Xerxes launched a far larger campaign to subdue Greece. The invasion brought enormous armies across the Hellespont and into the Greek mainland. Some Greek states submitted, others prepared for war. Battles followed that would later become famous: Thermopylae, where a small Greek force delayed the Persian advance; Salamis, where Greek naval tactics destroyed much of the Persian fleet. Once again, the outcome surprised many. The Persian Empire was not defeated in a decisive sense. Its core territories remained intact. But the campaigns demonstrated that even the largest imperial structures struggled when confronted by highly decentralized opponents fighting on familiar terrain. The system had been designed to govern diversity. It had not been designed to conquer every frontier. In the decades that followed, the Persian Empire remained strong. Its administrative networks functioned. Trade continued across its roads. Royal authority still commanded enormous resources. But beneath the surface, subtle tensions began to emerge. The very system that had allowed Persia to rule vast territories required constant balance. Provincial governors wielded significant power. Royal succession sometimes triggered internal struggles. Communication across enormous distances, though improved, still carried delays that could complicate coordination. Meanwhile, the system adjusted. Empires rarely collapse suddenly. Instead, they accumulate pressures slowly, often while appearing outwardly stable. In the Persian case, the foundations built by Cyrus and Darius remained impressive. Yet the empire's size, diversity, and political complexity ensured that maintaining cohesion would always require capable leadership. For a time, the system endured, but history has a habit of testing even the most carefully constructed structures, and eventually a new challenger would arrive from the west, one who understood how to exploit the very scale that had once made Persia so powerful. The past is quiet, but it's never done speaking. Subscribe to the history of the world, because understanding how it worked is the first step to understanding where we are now.